Right, so we're looking at solving a proportion. Remember that proportions are simply a situation where you have two fractions set equal to each other. Again, a proportion is when you have two fractions set equal to each other. And what we're interested in doing here is solving for y. Well, since, I don't know, 6th or 7th grade, you've learned that in order to solve a proportion, you cross multiply. So in this case, I'm going to take 2 multiplied by y squared minus 9, and I'm going to set it equal to y plus 3 multiplied by y minus 3. In distributing the 2, I end up with 2y squared minus 18 equals. I could FOIL this, but I'm hoping at this point that you realize that when I have y plus 3 times y minus 3, I'm simply going to get y squared minus 9. And the reason for that is that the middle terms will always drop out when I have this pattern. So I'm going to write it down as y squared minus 9. Now, you'll notice that your y is raised to the second power. Whenever you have quadratics like this, and a quadratic means that your variable is raised to the second power. Whenever you have quadratics like this, your objective is to get all of your algebra on one side of the equal sign and your numbers on the other. So in this case, I'm going to subtract y squared from both sides at the same time that I add 9 to both sides. In so doing, I ensure that the right-hand side of my equal sign becomes 0. 2y squared minus 1y squared is 1y squared. Negative 18 plus 9 is negative 9. And I'm left with 0. Well, if I know that y squared minus 9 equals 0, now I have to factor. And by coincidence, we end up with y and y, plus and minus, 3 and 3 again, just as we had earlier on in the problem. Once I have this, this sentence means that this number times this number equals 0. In multiplication, the only time you can get 0 as an answer is if one or more of your numbers is 0. So I'm simply going to write, well, y plus 3 could equal 0, which when I subtract 3 means y equals negative 3. Likewise, y minus 3 could equal 0. So when I add 3 to both sides, I'm going to end up with y equals positive 3. Now, my two solutions here are 3 and negative 3. I have to check to make sure that neither of these answers will cause me problems in my original question. If you take a look right there at that denominator, and you think about plugging negative 3 in for y, what happens? Yeah, you end up with a 0 in the denominator of your fraction, which in math is not allowed. You're not allowed to have 0 in the bottom of a fraction because it makes that fraction undefined. So I have to go ahead and reject the answer of negative 3, leaving my only answer for this problem to be 3. Let's take a look at another quick problem. I've got 2 over 3t equals t minus 1 over t. Again, it's a proportion. Again, what I want to look to do is to cross multiply to solve. It's pretty important that you don't try to do this in your head. I know the temptation is there to do exactly that. But I promise you, if you do this in your head, you will continually make small errors that will drive you nuts over time. So just lay down your pride for a minute and write down the actual multiplication. When I do that, it's obvious to me that the 3t needs to be distributed to both the t and the negative 1, leaving me with 3t squared minus 3t equals 2t. Once again, you should notice that you have a quadratic here. That means that one of your exponents is raised to the second power. Whenever we have quadratics, our objective is to get all the algebra on one side of the equal sign and 0 on the other. So in this case, I'll simply subtract 2t from both sides of the equal sign. And in so doing, I'll end up with 3t squared minus 5t equals 0. Factoring in this case is a little different than the last one because I have a greatest common factor. In this case, it's a t. I can pull a t out front, and I'll have times 3t minus 5 equals 0. Again, we're back to the case that that number times that number equals 0, which means one or both of them must be 0. So either t equals 0 or 3t minus 5 equals 0. As I solve for t in this problem here, I'm going to end up with t equals 5/3, it looks like. I want to check both of those answers in my original problem. If I look right there, one of my answers is obviously an issue. If I allow t to be 0, then the denominator of this entire fraction becomes 0, and that's a no-no. So I have to reject that as my answer. 5/3 does not cause an issue in either one of the denominators. So I know that my only answer for this particular problem is 5/3.